Oh, it's him again. In a column for the British weekly newspaper Spectator, former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson spoke out in favor of faster arms deliveries to Ukraine, and at the same time also issued a warning to the former and maybe next US President Donald Trump. He wants to run again as presidential candidate for the US Republicans in 2024. But in the eyes of his companion Johnson, he drastically underestimated the war in Ukraine. In the event of his election victory, Johnson warned Trump to continue supporting Ukraine in the war against Russia under rule of Vladimir Putin. This is the only way to prevent dire consequences for the West. A Putin victory would be a catastrophe for Western governments as well as those of the USA, as Johnson writes in his article, and warns Trump that this victory is not an outcome that US President can simply ignore, especially not if he decides that the goal was to make America great again. A clear allusion to Trump, who was an important companion of the Brexit supporter during Johnson's term as Prime Minister and while he was US President. The former journalist Johnson, if you may call him that, has been considered a close ally of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky since the beginning of the war, has met him several times in Kiev, and has repeatedly spoken out loudly in interviews and guest articles in the British media as a supporter of Western military aid for Ukraine. In his most recent guest article for The Spectator, he criticized the West's hesitant actions and thus sided with tens of thousands of injured Ukrainian soldiers who are working in rehabilitation centers after operations or even with prostheses to be able to go to war again. And these people, according to Johnson, wanted only one thing from the West: the weapons to finish their job. He did not understand why Western countries were hesitant to give them this support, and criticized current policymakers for underestimating the Ukrainians and overestimating Putin in the 19 months since the start of the war, something that has not changed to this day. Instead, he called on Ukraine's Western partners to provide the country with weapons. Urgently needed to advance the counteroffensive would be transportable air defense systems, so-called Manpads, and Patriot anti-aircraft missiles, as well as long-range missiles, Storm Shadow cruise missiles, and artillery. Johnson also specifically criticized his former companion Donald Trump, as I said, who has repeatedly criticized the USA's role in the Ukraine war, sometimes criticized his successor Joe Biden's support for Ukraine, and then claimed that Putin would never have come up with this whole idea if he was still US president, so Putin would not have attacked Ukraine. And Johnson sees underestimating Putin and accepting a possible Russian victory as a big risk. If Putin wins, all he has to do is declare a Russian victory and hold on to only part of the conquered territory. It will send a terrible message to the world that this is the moment when the democracies have to say we were able to stand in the way of autocracies and clearly failed, as Johnson writes in his guest article. The fact that Putin is demonstrating that European borders can be moved is a dramatic message to countries like Georgia, the Baltic states, and the entire former Soviet Union. If the West instead demonstrated strength, the opposite message would go around the world: that we stand behind the democratic form of government, that we are willing to follow our principles, and that the West has the courage to stick with something until it succeeds, Johnson writes. The relationship between Boris Johnson and Donald Trump has evolved over time, from mutual admiration and support to a more distant and even strained relationship. The two men first met in 2015 when Johnson was mayor of London and Trump was a businessman and reality TV star. Johnson was a vocal supporter of Trump's presidential campaign, and the two shared many similarities, including their populist rhetoric, but also their anti-establishment stance and their willingness to challenge the status quo. After Trump won the election in 2016, Johnson was one of the first world leaders to visit him in the White House. The two men developed a close personal relationship, and Trump often referred to Johnson as Britain Trump. Johnson's support for Trump was controversial in the UK, but it helped him to win the leadership of the Conservative Party in 2019 and become Prime Minister. Johnson and Trump continued to work closely together during their time in office, and they cooperated on a number of issues, including trade, security, and Brexit. However, as I said, the relationship between Johnson and Trump began to cool in 2020 after Johnson refused to back Trump's claim that the US presidential election had been stolen. Johnson also criticized Trump's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Since Trump left office in 2021, the relationship between the two men has become even more strained. Trump has criticized Johnson for his support of Ukraine in the war against Russia, and he has even suggested that Johnson should resign as Prime Minister. Despite recent tensions, it is clear that Boris Johnson and Donald Trump have had a significant impact on each other's careers. They are both populists who have challenged the traditional political establishment, and they have both been successful in doing so. It remains to be seen how their relationship will evolve in the future. Just imagine some kind of a evil Halloween Groundhog Day. Trump back in office and Johnson back in office. That would probably feel like an alternate reality where, I don't know. I don't know if you like Supernatural like I do, but it's when Sam didn't throw Lucifer in the pit and Lucifer has won. So that would be kind of what I imagine the world would have looked like after. Just a thought I just got into my mind. Nevertheless, if you want to see another video on Brexit, current UK politics or the EU, the next thing is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.